Welcome to Call and Response. I'm Eric Longo, Executive Director of MCN, and I'm here to introduce and welcome our two presenters today. Unfortunately, Mikhail Yakovenko of the Polytechnic Museum in Moscow was unable to join us this week in Dallas, but I'd like to introduce Cristiano Bianchi of Keepthinking, who's going to talk about a truly responsive web, and Suse, who's now Digital Content Manager at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And as she was just sharing with me, when she had initially submitted her presentation back in April, she was not even in the job yet. So that should make for a very interesting session. On that note, call and response. Oh, and by the way, this session, as all sessions, is being recorded for audio. So if you have questions at the end, which we're a small audience, obviously, come to the microphone in the middle of the room so that we can hear your questions. All right?
Eric, who would you prefer to go first?
Well, ladies first.
So I'm going to ask a little question. I'm going to do a very quick poll of the room. My slides are meaningless. They're just there so that there's some pretty pictures occasionally. Do we want slides or, is that useful? Yeah. Either way. Either way. Okay, I'll do it just in case. But
Make sure you speak in the microphone.
on my way. Oh, except I've just changed format. There we go, except it has just changed all of its resolution. But that's okay. I'm going to let Eric do some tech stuff while I start by introducing myself and having a little conversation. So this is the first time I've been at MCN as someone representing a museum. I normally am here as a PhD candidate.
Do you know how to do that?
So it's very strange for me to have to learn how to talk about an institution rather than just talking about my crazy ideas and research from reading and writing and thinking. But it's not to privilege one role over another. I think it's actually really lovely to take a moment to think about how different ways of looking at a problem can give you different answers. But, as Eric said, the other reason I'm saying this is that I wasn't in the job when I wrote this session proposal. I knew it was happening, we were working on paperwork, but coming from Australia, that takes a little bit of time. So this was an anticipatory session description that I was writing.
Thanks.
I hadn't yet been to Baltimore, I hadn't yet been to the Vma, and I didn't really know what the coming months were going to be involving. It's pretty close. I managed to do pretty well with my guesstimate, and I'm still going to talk about about our blog and a blogging project, and use that to think about institutional change. And those are the things that I made it into the session description. But I'm going to talk about a slightly different project than the one I originally anticipated. But I might start with a little bit of background about the museum and why it was so compelling for me to move from Australia to work at it. This is the Baltimore Museum of Art, and in 1914, it was founded with a single work of art. Last Sunday, in fact, it turned 100. And you can see by the fancy 100 logo that it is our birthday. So this is a museum that has been around for a century now. But it's also been going through a major redevelopment, a $28 million redevelopment. And the coming Sunday, we're reopening the American wing, which has been refurbished, rethought, renovated. This entrance, the Merrick entrance, is opening for the first time in, I think, 32 years. Next year, we're reopening the American and the African and Asian galleries, and we're also starting our Creative Learning Centre, our Creative Learning Space. So this was a really interesting museum to me because it is both in the midst of a period of longevity. It's going through a really significant time in terms of its age, but it's also going through a really significant time in terms of its process of regeneration and reinvention. Now, accompanying this period of renewal, the BMA created its first digital department. It was headed up by Nancy Proctor, who many of you will know, formerly of the Smithsonian, who is co-chair of Museums and the Web. Now, she joined the team in March as Deputy Director for Digital Experience and Communications. I came on in June, and Ryan Donoghue, who was at the Met before now, joined us in September as Chief Technology Officer. So in a period of about 7 months, we went from having no digital staff in the museum to having the start of a team that's, covering many different areas. But what I think is maybe most significant about this is that these changes aren't happening in isolation. They're happening in the context of very significant institutional change across the board. So if we think about digital transformation, which is something we're always talking about at MCN, oh, there we go. I didn't change my settings. Then it's always useful to remember that digital transformation always takes place within a social context. And the context of the BMA is an institution already embracing change generally. So even if it didn't have a digital division until now, its values and its working practices have really always emphasised community, collaboration, and accessibility, which are, I think, the values of a very successful digitally connected institution. We might not have had the team until recently, but we had the mindset. That's what made this a really compelling institution for me to work at. So that's the broader context of this, and now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our blogging project. Because we're a new team, we got to work and we've hit the ground fairly quickly with a lot of projects happening at once. But the one that I think is most meaningful to me is the blogging project that we've done to celebrate the 100th anniversary. It's a small project in some ways, in other ways not so small. But as Charlotte reminded us today in our conversation, it's actually often small things that have significant ripple effects. And if we're thinking about institutional culture and institutional change, then sometimes small changes can actually be fairly significant. So, the BMA blog. Our blog started in March, and it was fairly sparse on content. We'd put some things up, but it wasn't a major part of our content strategy straight away. But to celebrate the birthday, we decided that we would do 100 blog posts in 100 days. And that is a fairly ambitious goal. It was drawn from every member of the curatorial division, so conservation, registration, technicians, curators, curatorial assistants. And we would do it with about 6 weeks' notice. The project would basically provide a series of postcards from the collection with stories told from the perspectives of the people who work most closely with the art. It would offer us a mechanism for creating and exposing the content related to the collection, which we haven't had much opportunity to do before, to make the collection accessible, and to give voice to people within the institution who might not previously have had that voice. But also we wanted to start introducing digital skills and digital thinking across the board. And so by involving so many people in this project, that's been a really significant part of that. Now the project is challenging. This is part of the spreadsheet for managing it. And we sort of made a couple of decisions early on that have added to the complexity, but also I think added to what's made the project work. We told people they could choose whatever object they wanted. So people could choose any object that they were passionate about, that they found inspiring. Now, that meant that a lot of our objects didn't have existing photography. They didn't have existing rights clearances. We had to try and secure these things with a museum already stretched with major reopenings, a celebration. And to do that, by the time we actually got this list of people, we had about 4 to 5 weeks to get this up and happening. We also decided to make the format of the storytelling flexible. We told people that they could choose to do it via audio, via video, or as a written post. We've never done a project like that before. We don't have internal video capacity. We had to bring someone in. We don't have internal editing. We also didn't have a budget for the project. So we had basically no time, no money, and nothing but goodwill. And yet, this has been a really, really wonderful and exciting project. We have had some of the most interesting posts that, for me, as a newcomer to the institution, we've had incredibly interesting and insightful posts. Why am I excited about this project? For the one thing, we always talk about wanting responsive institutions. And the fact that everyone jumped on board and said yes was a very nice thing. This is completely the idea of a scrappy, responsive project. It's also highly collaborative. I've had to work with every member of the curatorial division. And as someone who's a newcomer to the museum, but who's working in digital content, for me to actually have the chance to get to know the people in the institution one-on-one and find out what they're passionate about and therefore what other stories we might be able to work with later on, that's been hugely significant. We can never underrate or undermine or underestimate the importance of getting to know the people you work with if you're asking them to invest in you. And I think the other thing is the eagerness and creativity that people have really invested in this project. The next thing I'm going to show you, one of our conservators, Angie, who you can see here, she teamed with our photographer and a second conservator to create a stop-motion animation of themselves putting together. You know what? Of them putting together a George Rickey sculpture. So again, this is an idea they came up with. They were doing a trial run of this in preparation for its hanging in the American wing, and so they decided that they would actually do this for the blog. It's exceptionally simple, and yet gives such a different sense of what the work is that we do, that our conservators do, and what it looks like to hang a sculpture.
And most sculptures don't even hang, so that's something in itself.
Right. So this, for me, this is precisely the sort of thing that I found so compelling about working on this project. What I've also loved is the fact that by giving people the option to choose what they wanted to talk about, and by making it completely open, and telling people that what we wanted was warm and personal stories, the sort they'd tell to a friend, which was the argument that we gave people. People in the museum who've never before had a voice have been telling us very personal stories and institutional stories in digital formats and speaking from a place of passion in public. So this is from our curatorial assistant for American Painting and Sculpture and Decorative Arts, Dawn Krause, and she says, "I love Mark Toby's 5 a.m. because it captures the energy of a busy city already in motion in the wee hours of the morning. I've always been fascinated by cities, probably because I lived 2/3 of my life on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The first time I went to New York, I was spellbound. When I moved to Baltimore 5 years ago to work at the BMA, 5 a.m. quickly became one of my favorite paintings." Here's this woman I work with, and she lived in the middle of the Pacific Ocean most of her life. What does that do to her sense of the city? How does she end up in Baltimore? I have so many questions about her based on this very personal post. Another one. This is from Laura Albans, who's our curatorial assistant for European Painting, Sculpture and Conservation. Leon Kroll's landscape Two Rivers was first brought to my attention by my then 10-year-old son, who discovered it in 2001 visit to the museum. I clearly remember him standing in front of this majestic painting extolling its beauty. It was amazing to see my young child completely engaged in a work of art, absolutely mesmerized by its magnificence and unable to take his eyes off the canvas, just standing in front of it and saying, "Now that's a beautiful painting." These are incredibly personal moments. They're love stories to objects. But perhaps more importantly, they're stories about the people who work in my museum just as much as they are about the collection. We've had stories about Baltimore, we've had stories of the museum's history and patronage, but we've had stories that are intimate and revealing. We've also had stories that are exceptionally brave, I think. The introduction to last night's post is by Helen Grabau, I can never say her last name, who is our contemporary art curatorial assistant. This is how she starts. "Which work of art do you believe least belongs in the galleries? It was 1998 and I'd just begun training to become a BMA docent when this question was posed to me. Before we had an introduction to the contemporary collection, my docent class was set free in the contemporary wing, with the assignment of choosing the work of art that we felt least belonged in the museum. After setting off to explore the galleries, the group reconvened to share our answers. When my turn came, I told the group that I had selected Donald Judd's Untitled 1976. I cringe when I think of it, but I clearly recall saying that I felt his plywood box looked like something that belonged on a construction site or a playground, but not in an art museum. Now, Helene details how the docent training then asked her to go and research the piece and convince the other people in the class why it actually did deserve to be there. But she then talks about her process of discovery. In other words, she shares her insight of the process of moving from being in the dark about a work of art to being in the light, from not getting it to getting it. She is talking about the very thing that we want people who come into the museum to experience. But I think there's something exceptionally brave about admitting in public, about stating in public, that you didn't always understand the things that are part of your profession. So, Nick Couldry argues that the aim of digital storytelling is not to produce media for broadcast, but to produce conversational media. It's a term he borrows from Joe Lambert, whereby much of what we help people create would not easily stand alone as broadcast media, but in the context of conversation, it can be extraordinarily powerful. And I think these blog posts and the space for conversation they've created, both internally but also externally, have opened up a dialogue which is at the heart of so much museum work. The reason this has been a powerful project for me is because it's created a new social space in the museum. So what's worked and why? Simply having a mandate helped. Actually having investment from the top that said, yep, this is a project we're going to invest in and you're all going to be involved. Yeah, that helped. There were definitely a number of people who were not enthusiastic about the project before they started it, who were very worried about the time it was going to take them or the fact that they had to write digitally because they've never done that before. Having a great team mattered. Actually, the fact, I couldn't have done this without our photographer. I couldn't have done this without Image Services and Rights, who are constantly hassling our rights holders to say, we need this now. They have been fantastic. But what else? I think asking our authors to write from a place of passion, I think that was really significant. I think the fact a number of people have chosen works outside their areas of expertise. They've chosen works that involve them to go and sit with a curator and have a conversation about a work that's in their part of the collection. So rather than saying, write about the stuff you know, we almost ask them to write about the stuff they didn't know. And I think that has been very powerful. So within that, we've not just been producing new content, but as I say, producing a new social space and relationship within the museum. My slides aren't important, I'm ignoring them. And I think the most avid readers of our project are actually other staff. Although this was an outward-facing project, because it has been so built on passion and personality, it's very significantly been an inward-facing project too. It's really helped upend notions of who can speak for and within the museum. I've had a number of people, say curatorial assistants, come up to me and say, I've never done anything like this before because it's never me who speaks. And I think that is really significant, although I want to expand it. I want our guards speaking, I want our docents, I want our community members speaking. But we can do that for the next project. We did support the introduction of the initiative with things like a computer club and teaching people more about blogging. If people have needed hand-holding, if they've needed one-on-one sessions, we go and do that. I think it's really important for us that we're acting as a service, like a service role within the institution, and so when someone needs us to make their job easier, we go and help them, because that then makes our job easier and it gives them time to trust and get to know us. Now, what's been challenging? Starting a project that took so many resources when we didn't have any, that's been challenging. Starting it at a time when the museum was already stretched, that's been challenging. It's a very complex project, and more so because everyone who was involved with it was new at it. Our videographer was new at the project of this type. All of our authors were new at doing this. We actually, as an institution, haven't done anything like that. And I think that was significant. There have been weeks when rights clearances hadn't come through as quickly as we'd expected, or where staff members got overwhelmed and therefore didn't get the posts into me, that I haven't been sure that I would make it to the end of the week with enough posts. It has made it down to the wire a couple of times, and it is the most unnerving thing. We've also had, members of staff who have been poached by other institutions in 1 or 2 cases. So we're down authors. What do you do to resolve that when everyone's already giving you so much? There are things that I still don't have the answers to entirely, but I've got some clues. Feedback matters. The feedback loop is so important. Telling people what they're doing well, thanking them, making sure they know that you appreciate the effort. This is significant. Taking time to listen and acknowledge people's fears. If a curator comes up to you and says, "I don't have time for this," that's a very real and genuine fear. So working out some systems or some strategies or some ways you can support them, this does a lot to build that relationship, but it also, I think it matters so much that people are heard. Sometimes the problem itself is actually just that they don't feel that they're being acknowledged. And simply listening to someone, simply acknowledging them actually matters. Now, the project I've spoken about is in some ways a simple one. It's a blogging project. It's something people in our sector have been doing for a very long time. And it's only a tiny part of the digital work that's happening at the BMA. But it still has taken a lot of cultivating and investment because it's working within a new context for us as an institution. Social change, institutional change, within a museum is never determined by the technology, even though the technology requires and leads to change. Change is always embedded in what came before it. So for change to happen, the social structures that support it are critical. When you have an institution that identifies a technology and its affordances as being important, that's significant. Even that acknowledgement starts the process of change. When the BMA decided to hire Nancy and start a digital division, the institution was making a declarative statement internally and externally that digital is and will continue to be important. When the curatorial division threw their support behind the project, a project that would require investment across the entire division at a time when the whole museum was stretched, they placed value upon that digital project and the communication it would engender. And therefore that process of social change, of institutional change, of creating the museum into a digital one right across the board was embedded into our social structures, into our values and into our narratives. And I think these are significant factors as to how we can proceed forward with institutional change ourselves. Leadership investment matters, yes, but so does what we can do, like listening to our staff and acknowledging their fears and trying to find ways to work with them. Everything I've done in this project has been aimed at minimising the pain and the workload of people I'm collaborating with. There's still been a significant amount of workload for all of them, but everything I can do to make that easier makes it easier for them and makes them more willing to do something about it. When we talk about starting small, as is the theme of this conference, I think a huge act that is very small is listening. And all of this adds to building trust and confidence. Last year I was at a talk in Australia and I heard someone make the comment, people don't fear change, what they fear is loss. And I think it's a really useful thing for all of us to remember. Change happens all the time. It happens within our institutions, it happens within our personal lives. We can't escape it. But what really gets people anxious is not change, it's loss. It's the possibility of loss of face or loss of income or loss of respect of the community or that a funder will disappear or that a donor will disappear. We get worried about loss of control. We get worried about loss of reputation. What our job is to make people understand that the gains are so much more significant than the potential losses. Because actually that's when change becomes very compelling. Change becomes compelling when the idea of not changing is actually the loss. I'm going to finish with two little things. One's a quote from my director, and again, this speaks to why I wanted to work at the BMA. She says, the rate at which the present and the future are becoming the past is speeding up. You can't just sit there and say, well, I changed 5 years ago, that's enough. You have to always be willing to know that new things are afoot. We have an institution that is willing to change, and that's very nice. But change doesn't have to be huge to be meaningful. Again, I'm talking about a blogging project. This is not something that's new to our sector. And yet the change that it's engendered within my own institution that I can see and feel, that I have people, a couple of weeks ago I had 3 people from the curatorial division in a single day come up and say, I really can't believe how much this has changed in terms of the conversations we're having. You can have very significant changes from very small projects. But a big part of it is actually what we do ourselves internally and the relationships we build to make those changes happen. So thanks.
Question again?
Oh, I left it up there.
Hi. No, I do have slides. Actually, I need them. Thanks for being here. Now, I'll also start with a question. I mean, I presume that most of you come from museums. How many of you have a responsive website? What do you mean by a responsive website?
Resizes depending on the interface.
Okay. Is there a general consensus on that?
Ours is actually designed around the gift. So when you log in, if you've given something or you're interested in something, the money that was associated drives the communication you'll have within the website.
Okay. So this is partly based on our work and partly not, and partly exploring some ideas. So it's a very abstract, if you want, series of ideas, series of provocations or anything, questions, more than solutions. And that are based on some examples. So who are we? This is what we're coping with at the moment. So we experience the web everywhere. It's not just a laptop, it's not just a mobile phone, it's a Kindle. I mean, I can read my email on my Kindle. I can do stuff on my Kindle. What we are, just 3 slides where we are. We are based in London, we are Keepthinking. We have been designing interfaces and digital design, generally speaking, for the last 13 years, and only for museums and culture. And we do a lot of stuff. We do digital strategy consulting, website, exhibition design, and everything that has as an element of digital and as an element of culture is of our interest. And we've been working quite a bit. I mean, it's been 13 years. If we're still going, it means that we do have clients, of course, and those clients are increasingly coming from all over the place. And we have a software that goes with it. But that's a separate conversation. If you're interested, we are down the hall. Now, what I've been researching and studying, also because, again, we always do things that need to respond to, we thought, different devices, different screen sizes, because more and more people now come to your website with a mobile phone, with a tablet, with potentially other devices, soon with their cars as well, with a PlayStation. I mean, all of these things happen. So this is a summary of what I would like to talk about. First of all, is some question. What are the current assumptions? What is missing in this assumption that are currently the basis for designing responsive web? And what are these interim conclusions? So the first question is, what does it mean to be responsive? Responsive to what? Is it just a technical question? Is it just a design question? Or is it responsive to your audience as well? And responsive to your content? Responsive to other factors that have nothing to do with the device I'm coming to you with? So is it just a question of screen size? Are we sure that people coming with an iPad want a different experience? But if it's different, how it is different? Can responsive design be independent of screen size? And what are the factors to consider? A lot of this presentation is actually taking ideas from other places, and I have all the sources at the end if you really want to explore all of this. So there's partly our research in design a responsive, or try to design a responsive web, and there's other people that are talking about it in many ways, that are in many ways more competent than me in this. This is not the web. I like this picture also because it's a sound workstation, not just any workstation. So it's a very antiquated concept of what we thought the web was. Now, this is the web as we know it now. And what will the web be? It's a fascinating, my background is architecture, actually. I have nothing to do with digital design. And I came here to doing information architecture instead of physical architecture. I've been working as architecture in physical building for 10 years, and then moved across to information architecture because I always thought that, especially in the field of museums and culture, this is a great opportunity to create spaces, and virtual spaces and digital spaces, and expanding the museum into something that the museum cannot be because it's limited by its physical size. Now we have other type of limitations where in many cases there are also great opportunities. So I have a few quotes, and this is one of my favorite ones. The web is an inherently unstable medium. Most designers that come to design for the web come from print design, and they're totally confused. When you give them constraints like, I don't know how the text will be, how long the text will be. I'm not entirely sure that that font will render exactly the same way in different browsers. They are completely confused. I don't know, I mean, we have a content management system. I don't know how many pictures the content editor will upload. I have no idea. It's up to them. We cannot control everything. This is another very nice one. Mobile is a user state, not a device. When am I mobile? I can be mobile at home if one of my 3 children prevent me from concentrating on what I'm doing because I'm switching room and try to do some work in the meantime. And this is the challenging one, which is the assumption is the mobile equals less is wrong and damaging because we are confusing content with context. The correct assumption is actually, and the context is emergent. So it's actually the activity itself that I'm engaging on or I'm engaging with at the moment that I'm actually consuming your content that determines what is my attitude towards reading less or more, or actually what am I looking for. And this is the current practice. So the current practice is that we scale up and down when we're lucky up, when we are regularly down, and we assume that people coming from smaller screen, there's a very interesting assumption, which is people coming with smaller screen want less because they have less space. Now, that is true to an extent, but it's more a question of prioritizing content rather than assuming that we need to have less. So what I'm advocating here is moving from an idea of responsive design to actually talking more about a responsive philosophy. So you design in a completely different way. And that is challenging because it involves your content. It's not just design, and it's not just technology. It's much more than that. The first thing, graphical user interface versus natural user interface. And I'll go into detail. What is natural user interface? It's scrolling, it's tapping, it's pinching. It's all of that. We are still stuck. If we just do plain responsive design, we're still stuck. We still have people coming at us with an iPad, but we still give them a point-and-click interface. And that cannot go on, because I was recently in an attraction park somewhere in the Far East, and there were all these very interesting screens displaying information about animals and fish and so on and so forth. And children were going at them and swiping. 5-year-old children were swiping. But of course, the screen had been designed 5 years ago, so swiping was not an action that was natural 5 years ago. No one thought of it until, of course, Apple came up with it. There's a lean forward and lean back attitude. And this has very much to do with the way we use our devices. So this is device dependent. On a laptop or on a desktop, I lean forward. And I'm about finding stuff very quickly. I'm about doing some work and get on and get away from it. Lean back is when I'm actually sitting on my sofa, in my bed. And actually, I'm much more inclined to read a book or something else. And then there's contextual conditions. What is the natural interface? I mean, I already spoiled this slide a little bit. So we have different ways of now moving in digital spaces. For instance, we don't have a hover state, and that needs to be taken into account. So not very many websites have that idea. The lean forward, lean back is an interesting one because the Kindle, especially the Kindle in 2007, changed the way that people consume long content. So the assumption that I'm coming to your website with a tablet and I want less has to be challenged. Because in reality, I might have a lot more time when I have an iPad in my hand and I might actually want to read more, which I'm not doing while I'm sitting on my desktop or I'm in my office. And there's a very interesting article about the digital strategy of the Economist, the newspaper, the English newspaper, which is that initially when they designed their website and the content to go on the web, they were in fear of losing people because people didn't want to consume that there. Now, what happened is with the coming on the iPad, they noticed that the visitors, and they were doing a lot of surveys, the visitors were actually having the same ritual of opening the newspaper, opening the magazine, and actually reading it on an iPad. It was becoming something that they were really enjoying doing. But the digital interface offered a lot more, which is the ability to engage more with the content, to share it, to have a dictionary online. English is not my first language, so certain words I don't understand. And of course, on an iPad, I can immediately look for it. Kindle is incredibly powerful at that. Content priorities. Now, we design a website and we design everything. And we as designer we have a limited budget, we can only produce a certain number of templates. So you can actually prioritize your content only according to whatever your designer or internal department allow you to do. Look at what newspapers do, though, because the newspaper can actually rewrite the entire homepage or their entire front page according to the priorities of the moment. So in this case, of course, there's a very big difference between these three messages here. And it's the content that actually dictates the structure of the design and not trying to fit any content. And there was the article I took this from was, there's a big difference between breaking the war in Afghanistan and the new haircut of Bieber. I mean, but if we don't have that level of flexibility, of course, you need to fit them into the same structure. So, but the newspapers are static. They produce it and it's done. We need to mix it with content because very well that there's a war in Afghanistan, but actually I have a child who's crying here, and it's evening, it's dinner time, I'm really not going to engage with a massive article about the war in Afghanistan. Then there are content stereotypes. There is desktop content, and we are sitting on a proper computer with comfortable design, comfortable setting, and tasks that require prolonged concentration. Instead, the assumption is that mobile content is served in an unfamiliar setting. I'm in motion, I'm on a bus, I'm on a train. And so I need to have smart modes of information. In reality, there are studies that actually show that people use their mobile 60% of the time indoor. So the assumption that these are the truth need to be challenged a little bit. So if I wanted to leave you with something eventually, there are three strands. Of course, devices need to be taken into account when designing a responsive web, but they are not the only thing. There's the content, which is needs to be taken into account, and there's the context. So first of all, of course, the size of the device does matter, but needs to be combined with the other factors. The second one is the different attitude towards content, lean forward versus lean back. Works relaxation differences. And smaller size doesn't always mean less content, so we need to challenge that. But the most important thing is what is context specific. So responsive becomes an evolving strategy for you to design your content. So not only, I mean, it was already bad that we had, for the last 3-4 years, not only produce a website, but also a mobile website. But now we also, in my opinion, need also to think about what and how we deliver our content, which is not static anymore. You cannot just put something on the homepage and it stays there for a week, because in that week many things can happen, and depending on the week as well. So for instance, the first one is the device. Of course, adapt to the size and capability, because not all devices have all the same characteristics. Catering for natural interface design. Environment. If I'm outdoor, and we were in New York yesterday, and it was -6, I'm very unlikely to start typing on my mobile phone. And that needs to be taken into account. Should the content and interaction change with season? Again, I'm not proposing solutions here. I'm just asking questions and just pointing the finger of current misconception, which is not just the device size. There are many things, and actually, in many cases, an idea of responsive design is totally independent from the platform. Is dependent more on the content and context, and that's the message here. Time of the day. This is one of the few pictures that I have, which is how the use of different devices changes throughout the day, typically. I mean, again, like every statistic has, it can be very different. But of course, computers are very active during the day, and that's linked to our daily life. And then in the evening, they go down. And the tablet goes up very much. Activity and task. What do people want? What do they want to do? Have we asked them? Another thing is the idea of an M.dot website, for instance, having separate website where we assume that we know better than our users, and actually we patronize them slightly because we only give them what we think that they want, and we don't really know what they want. So give them everything and they decide whether they want it or not. You mentioned this a bit when I asked the question, there are individual preferences. And this is gray territory, because can you follow people and try to understand what they want to do? If someone is looking at content which is related to musical instrument, do you want to give them, suggest more musical instrument related content or not? But then in order to do that, you need to follow them. You need to have the evil cookie that actually tracks them. And I believe that as long as people are informed of what we're doing with our data, there shouldn't be any concern. And actually, it makes for a much better experience. But you also can ask individual preferences. And then there's a notion also of this, this allows you also to understand who's coming back at you all the time and who's not. Who's a first-time visitor needs information about your institution. Who's a repeating visitor doesn't. So the homepage cannot be the same for the two different types of people. So there's a little bit of too much being paranoid about tracking people, because it seems that it's always evil. In reality, we are not in an industry that want to sell anything to anyone in most cases, apart from membership, of course, but and donations and other few things. But and actually more and more, because there's no more money in this. so the need to monetize is there. But in reality, there is no overt commercial purpose in actually trying to understand and track what people are doing with the website, with your content. Social patterns. This is an interesting one, because we are here and we are in the States, and we are based in London, United Kingdom, and the idea of people sharing their mobile phone is alien to our cultures. But other cultures, they have one mobile phone for the whole family. So the idea of a persistent login needs to be discarded because everyone will have a different profile. And actually, iPhones don't allow that, but Android do. Android devices do allow different user profile on the same device. So, as a conclusion, responsive design, responsive web is not just about screen and device sizes, but we need to evaluate the relationship between devices, content, and context. The only way to do that is, of course, to keep designing and experimenting, and so ingest as much data as we can from our visitors, from our online visitors, analyze it, and act. It's not going to happen overnight. It will take time, and it will probably change the way that we think about our website, not as a series of static relationships, but a series of the relationships that actually change with the time of the day, with the day of the week, and with the attitude of visitors. These are the sources. I'm going to post this on SlideShare, so if you're interested, you can get it from there. Thank you.
So we can take questions whenever, if you want to have questions. And I just also wanted to tell you that we're doing those surveys per session this year, which are important to really inform the program for next year's conference. So if you leave the questions to next year's session a little bit earlier, I would really appreciate if you could take some time to fill those out, and you can let me find out if you're okay. Thanks so much. So any questions? Robin?
Hi. There, perfect. There. Cristiano, this is for you. I was wondering if you could share some examples of work that shows how the content looks in one context and then in a different context? Because it would be really easier to see what you're talking about if we could see examples.
I haven't seen many examples, otherwise I would have brought them.
Oh. Okay.
I was surprised that you were, I mean, what you're talking about is having different content in different contexts. But the one thing that you talked about where people are doing that, which is mobile websites, you said was bad, that you were giving people different content on their mobile, giving them, you know, the stripped down what you think a mobile, what the content creator thinks the mobile user needs. So I wanted you to elucidate the difference between making a iPad sit-back site versus making a mobile site or something, you know, in philosophy.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Well, my impression there is that it's not a question about stripping, it's not a question about removing content, it's a question about prioritizing. When we looked at those, the picture of the three front pages of a newspaper, it's not that the content won't be there. It will be in a different place because the priorities are different in different times, if you want.
So maybe it's putting things in more digestible packages for depending on how long you're going to be or what you're expecting. Someone really wants to read a lot on a phone, they might have to click more if you weren't expecting them to read a lot on the phone, but they would still have access to everything. Is that maybe one solution? Or?
That is definitely I would not, otherwise become censorship in a way. It's not, you don't want to do that. It's not that you know better than your visitors. It's just that it seems to me that the attitude with an iPad is that people are inclined to read more. And so you actually might want to think of creating content that is actually different on an iPad and on a desktop. Now, that doesn't mean that if you come from a desktop or a laptop, you cannot see it, but maybe you have a read more button on a desktop because you give the essential element of information on the top, while the iPad doesn't have that because the iPad is very easy to scroll down with a finger and not with a mouse. So it's a question of prioritizing it, and that becomes a question of design. I'm not advocating different content for different devices. I'm advocating a different design and different content delivery strategy, if you want.
Just one other question. Suse, I went to the the Art BMA website to look for the blog, and I couldn't find it.
Yeah. The website is being reworked, rethought at the moment. That's one of the things. So having a new digital team and having, say, Ryan, who can code, only come on in September, we, working on a number of different things, and that's one of them. One of the issues, I actually think one of the challenges with this blogging project that I didn't address and maybe should have is how we make it public. Because do we use that only on our other social media channels? Because we're creating so much content, do we put that out there every day? Well, yes and no. On one hand, we've got this great content we want people to see, and that's a way of delivering it to them because people aren't used to us having a blog yet, and we don't have a space for it very visible on the website. You can get there, it just takes a few clicks to find it. But we should be using our different social media platforms and locations for different types of content. And I'd like to be able to use Facebook for different things than just sharing our blog posts, but it's sort of the only outlet we've got at the moment. So we have some complexity there in terms of, again, we started a project very quickly, but we were also a new team, and so a lot of the structural things still need work.
To that, actually, I was curious if in your strategy you've thought much about creating content that's more evergreen, is what a term we use in our institution, that you could repurpose, and all of these creators and everyone is putting so much effort into it. Do you have a plan for repurposing things in the future, or are you trying to make it so that it is timely to the anniversary, or had you thought about that?
I'd like to say a bit of both. So we didn't, again, one of the things that I think enabled people to get involved very quickly was we didn't put strict structures on the types of things people could talk about. So some people have naturally spoken about things that are relevant to the anniversary or to new works that are going on display that haven't been on display for a long time. That said, we are thinking about where we can repurpose it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Story app. Story do an app that for cultural institutions. A number of institutions are on it. It's meant to serve as sort of a point of contact for people to be able to travel to different cities and find institutions. And we've now worked with Story to put ourselves on their app. And one of the things we're doing is actually repurposing some of the content there. That depends a little bit more on rights. Again, because we had short lead times, we found it easier to clear rights for one platform than for multiple platforms. But so we're definitely thinking about where else we can use this and whether we can use this in gallery and those sorts of contextual things. I don't know whether that will be the way we'll do that, in part because it was written specifically for this platform, and I think we might want to adapt it a little bit before we put it, say, in gallery. But we're looking at what else we can do. Because we've never had content like this before, we're actually still then also working out where else does content like this start to live, or how else do we maximize this? So the answer is we're thinking about it, but we don't have answers yet, or not conclusive ones.
I have a question for Cristiano.
Yeah.
So how much do you think that users should be able to define and set their own context? Because otherwise, when you start automatically doing it, what you already said, saying this is the mobile website, you are actually in danger of creating some sort of filter bubble again. But when some people are actually having to indicate a lot of settings, that's also not good. So did you already think a bit of a trade-off there, or? It's always
a time when you ask people to register and create a profile. You will be, as you know, not many people do it. So it's always very very challenging. So the first thing that you ask people is, who are you? What do you want? So. In most cases, the strategy is actually that you start capturing more data when they start interacting with you, because no one will want that kind of personalized experience. Not everyone will want that kind of personalized experience, but the moment they start interacting. If you have opportunities for them to interact with you, then you can start personalizing the experience because you can start capturing more. And it's up to them whether they want to tell you more or not. And it's always a design and user experience challenge to accommodate these extra requests. There was the one project we completed recently where actually we were asking people to discuss paintings. And actually, it's called Art Detective. The idea is that we have this digitized collection of 200,000 paintings across the United Kingdom, and people find them on the BBC and on the BBC website, and then they come to another website which is called Art Detective because they might have a question about whether the location which is depicted is a certain location that they have in mind that they recognize, or it's wrong what the title of the painting says, and so on. That has resulted as a side effect. The main effect of that is that there are like attributions being changed and so on and so forth. And we spent a lot of time designing, for instance, how do we ask people to register, because we wanted to capture these details. So in that case is when people actually expressed an interest of asking something, and they type the question, they type their notes, and before they submit, they have to register if they're not registered. But if the first thing that they need to do on the website is to register, and they don't know what they're getting, that's not going to work. In our experience, that's not going to work. So you play along and offer, if you want, advantages to people when they register, and they actually can do more. And now there are many ways of doing this, like you can use Facebook, you can use Twitter, so you don't have to capture the user details again and again, and ask them a very simple question: can we show you more content? Because otherwise, the pitfall is that there are always this. You go to a blog article for the sake of the argument, and at the end of the blog article, some curator has said, you might also be interested in this. And how do you know that he's interested or she's interested in that? Unless you track them to some extent, either automatically or by asking them to express preferences. And of course, if people are not interested in personalized experiences, there's nothing you can do about it, I guess. But making it easier, and that is a design challenge. That is very much a design challenge.
I have 3, 4 questions actually.
Wow.
For
the president.
Cristiano, is then you talked about responsive design, but there was no discussion about apps whatsoever. Are apps the answer to responsive design, or is it dictated by the digital strategy and the objectives of the institution?
I'm personally not a great fan of apps, simply because I can't expect that every time that I can't be expected every time I go to a new museum and download an app, because I visit a lot of them. So I'd rather have something which works on the web. I mean, for me to do an app means that you need access to specific phone functions or device functions that are not available elsewhere. So if I need a camera, yes, there's no other way. But if I don't need a camera, now with even HTML5 and CSS3, you can do a lot without creating an app. So we are doing an app at the moment which is allowing people to go into archaeological site and take a picture and apply that picture against the picture that was captured 100 years ago. And there we need an app. There's no other way to do it.
I guess my question was more in when you define first your mobile strategy, you're kind of you set your objectives, and based on what you're trying to achieve, you define what tools you're going to be using.
Yeah.
So. In business, there's a lot of talk about call to action, which I think museum can be. If there's a fundraising drive, for example, I think apps are more apt to deliver that type of experience or objective over a responsive site. And I think to me, a lot of what you described was very resonated absolutely also with app. I think context is everything, and a lot could be applied also to how we interact with an app. But it doesn't solve the question, I guess, among many institutions and among many of us here, where do you go for an app or where do you go for a mobile responsive site?
And it's up to you, but then I guess, I mean, it also depends on your content management strategy, to be honest. Does your app allow you to browse the same content that you have on your website or not? So that's one. So is it just a delivery mechanism? But to me, again, the app creates a barrier simply because people have to go and download the app. And I'm in the States with a UK mobile phone, and I don't have, unless I pay a lot of money, I don't have network access. And that creates, if I have to download several megabytes of an app, that's not going to happen. So you basically, you create an extra degree of separation between your user and your content, which is the app in between, because the browser is already installed on the on your mobile phone or your tablet. The app isn't. So you ask people to download the app first. So to me, you need a very specific reason for doing that, which cannot be accomplished with a mobile responsive website. It's just my view.
Let's talk about that.
Huh?
The way you've gotten around that, we have an app that downloads, but also to get it, you just log into our wireless network.
Yeah, okay, of course you can do that.
Because we're recording the session.
But when you log into a wireless network, it captures your information. It gives you high-speed access because you filled it out, and then you could download the app. It doesn't cost you a dime.
Yes, but then you need to maintain two different things.
The app just draws from the website. All the content that's built into the app is built into the website.
And
It draws from the website.
So can I ask the question to you? So why do you have an app?
Well, we have 10,000 people using it, and people download it almost every time they come on campus. Parents, visitors.
Right.
So it feeds in information about the museum, but it also feeds information about the college itself.
And what the app does, the mobile website wouldn't do.
We can track users, what they're doing on it.
But you can track them on the mobile phone as well.
That's what we do, just on the mobile phone. We really don't know so much on the web what they're doing,
Right.
other than using Google Analytics or something like that. But the mobile app allows us to have direct control over what they're doing, where they're going, what's of interest, and we can feed that directly built into the interface.
Right. So is it context? So it is location
Yes.
aware. Okay. That's a very good reason for having an app to me. So it's the location aware. But those are the things that you cannot do with a mobile with a mobile website. Well, you can actually, but it's more difficult to do it with a mobile website than it is with an app. So you can, Safari now on iOS can actually have location information as well. So you can do that. I don't know if there's a clear distinction, if there's a clear barrier between choosing. Again, as Eric said, it's down to your digital strategy, if that's not what you want to do.
Isn't it just a tool?
Yeah.
You just have all these sort of digital tools, and how you align them up for your goal.
Yeah, it is. This is why I was saying you need to think of the content before you think of the device and before you think of the software or anything. It's the content that is the one that you need to customize and potentially make responsive.
Yeah, I have a question regarding that. So you probably have to change the structure of your content too, right? To allow actually prioritizing content on your different device. So is it a lot different from how people now are already storing their content? Is there
No, storing the content is not I don't think that storing the content is the problem. Is the notion of what is challenging to me is the notion of having web pages. And having web pages are something like the way that, for instance, in most cases, Drupal or WordPress structure content is a long series of information all in one place, instead of having different modules that can be repurposed in different places. So if you have a collection object, you have an event, you have something else, then you can actually combine them in different ways, instead of having a long web page which has all of your information that are written down in a rich text field and all that. That becomes very challenging in terms of repurposing, because you simply cannot do it. It's one big blurb, and that's going to be delivered in only one way. If instead that big blurb is simply collecting information and actually prioritizing different type of things at different moments. Even if it's afternoon, there's an event in the afternoon, why do you show the website, the event of the day that starts at 9 o'clock in the morning? I mean, but if it's a page in WordPress, because this was today's event, hopefully not many people will have that, but there are still examples of that, then you cannot do that. You simply cannot do it. So it can be, I mean, despite the fact that my introduction, if you want, was very superficial and very shallow, it can actually start from very, very little steps of creating content in a better way, in a more relational way, rather than rethinking the whole thing. A more modular approach, if you want. That means that I need to spend a lot more time thinking about this before the presentation. Very tough question. I like it.
Suse, what was the feedback from the public?
It's been interesting. Everyone who has commented on either the blog or on Facebook or anything like that, it's been overwhelmingly positive. But that issue of distribution, I think, is challenging for us in terms of where we put it. So I'd still like to have more ways of getting different people seeing the content. I think there are a lot of people who would be really interested in this who maybe aren't seeing it yet, like more of our members and things like that. I actually think that we need to, and we're working on this.
Did they engage with the content? Or?
No, we haven't had a lot of people commenting. We have on Facebook posts and things, but not on the blog itself. But I think that is part of the way. I don't think we've been writing these posts as provocations. I think we've been writing them as complete stories. And I don't think, until now, we haven't provided digital outlets for people to speak back to us. We haven't had a lot of social media. We had a Facebook page, but it was largely just putting out pictures and sort of not asking people to respond back. We actually haven't, I don't think, internally trained our audiences yet that what we're interested in is that interaction. The fact that they're reading it and talking about it being interesting, the fact that some posts they do ask questions on Facebook and stuff, I'm very happy with. But I would like us to take that further. But we've never asked this of our audience before either. Audience, visitors, users, I'm not sure what the right word is. But we actually haven't asked for interaction from them before. So I think we've actually got a little way to go before we get to that space, and I'm not sure this project is for that.
Is anyone from the Metropolitan Museum in the audience? Because I know the Met had something, a similar series on staff talking about their collection, which I thought is a very interesting angle.
Yeah, I'd like to find out the responses they've had. We certainly looked at theirs as one of the examples when we were coming up with this. Right. It was actually really nice that existed because internally a lot of our staff they didn't have that sense of confidence within this initially, but looking at things like the Met connections and stuff was like, this is what we can do. So I think that made a big difference.
There's just one comment on your question and related to the mobile app. And I was thinking, it's very difficult to build into a project, into any sort of web project or design project, some meaningful metrics and statistics of what we want to get out of it at the end of the day. How do we want to analyze how people use it? Because we always, everyone relies on Google Analytics, but Google Analytics is very insufficient for many different purposes. So for instance, there's no way that any new museum website can get away without having the very minimum, which is a responsive website, which is responsive in the sense of design and technology. But it's very easy now to build location-aware sensitivity into that and metrics into that. So you can actually analyze whether people use that website at home or near your museum. And if it's actually near your museum, then you have a very good argument for creating a mobile app, a native app, because it means that people want to use it when they're there, and therefore you can give them more. While if the vast majority don't even bother taking out their website, their mobile, then maybe you need to rethink this strategy. So all of this is just to say that by building better analytics into whatever project we need to do, then that can actually inform the next steps in our digital strategy. Just a thought.
Suse had a question. You talked about change. So I'm a CIO for Bowdoin College and actually sit over all divisions and think strategically on how to use technology.
Yeah.
But one of the hardest things I have to do is I go through and we do a business process assessment of what they're doing, sort of an analog to what they've been doing for the last 50 or 60 years, and then sit down and redesign all the jobs, redesign all of the sort of work they're going to do, and we tell them what they're not going to do anymore.
Huh.
And what they're going to do in the future.
Yeah.
But that process can go on for 6 months to a year. And I was
Yeah.
wondering, are you doing that within your institution as far as redesigning not just your institution, but your institution to be a digital organization versus an analog of your old organization, your digital world?
It's an interesting question. I think that the fact that we've now got people at a deputy director level in a digital strategy position, I think will certainly be impacting those sorts of things. I'm not sure the extent to which job application or job descriptions are being rewritten, in part because that's just not my role to know that. Will it happen? I anticipate it will continue to, but again, I think one of the things that's very sort of strange for us is, well, not strange, but we are a brand new team. And so actually coming in and trying to, I look at what we've done in the last 7 months as a team, particularly since Nancy was the only one for the first 3 months and then there were just 2 of us. Like I actually think the impact has been significant, but I think it will continue to be ongoing. I like one thing that you just said that I think is really significant is telling people what they won't be doing. When I raise the issue that people will often come with the sense that this is a workload problem, like I don't know how to fit this into my life. One of the challenges, and I remember reading a study about this in the news sector, is that if people are often very hesitant about digital when they feel it's just going to be more workload, whereas if you can actually give them the thing that they can substitute or the thing that they can leave off and do this instead, people become much more comfortable and embracing of digital because suddenly they understand how it integrates into their job and their expectations. So I think what you're doing in actually teaching people what they're not going to be doing as much as what the new expectation is very significant because it gives people a chance to understand that it's not just doing more, it's actually doing things differently. So yeah, that doesn't directly answer your question, but I hope it sort of does. I think we're on our way to that change across as the institution, but that's above me.
Any more questions? Going once, twice, adjudicated. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.